hello everybody, and welcome to this last panel that I think Lucas very nicely introduced as a topic very close and dear to Estonia on digital public infrastructure and digital public goods. But before we are going to solve all the issues that were raised by Ben and Ville in the previous session, I would also like to point out that it is actually the longest session that we have had in Tallinn Digital Summit. And I believe there is a reason when looking at what we were discussing in these two past days, and I know that Ivan just landed, but this topic has been very close to you for a long time anyway, is actually potentially a solution to all these problems that we have been discussing here over the past 2 days. And I know I'm going to repeat many of the great minds from private sector that we heard here and the government, but just to briefly wrap it up, we are all struggling with skills. We have agreed that we are rather similar in our needs, especially in the government. The services that we provide to our partners are rather similar across the countries, and that, as was also pointed out in one of the panels today, we are governments actually not competing with each other over these services, and I believe it was pointed out in the lunch earlier. So we have this opportunity actually to pool resources, to pull our skills and also financial resources and build things together. And we are going to move to why this has actually not kicked off in the speed we perhaps would expect to or would like to. But before that, I am pretty sure that also you have a lot to share. So it's not only Ben and Ville who do great things. I'm sure you all do. So let's start with a short introductory round to get to know better yourself and also what you are up to in the area of digital public infrastructure and digital public goods. We heard quite a bit from Ben already, so no offense, Ben, but we keep you for later. But let's start with Veronica, that has a rather recent role of Director-General for Informatics in the European Commission, and has quite a good overview of what is happening in Europe, but also in the member states. And tell me, what are you doing and how you are helping your clients?
Yes, well, yes, I'm seven months Director-General of Digit in the European Commission, and with not coming with a digital background. And of course, my esteemed predecessor is sitting on my right-hand side, so if I can't answer anything, I'm just going to turn around to Mário. But, I mean, the mandate I was given, there are two aspects to the work of the DG for Informatics. One is to be the provider of digital services to the Commission, to other EU institutions and agencies. But another important part of the role is actually to support Member States' public administrations in the whole interoperability area. So this is where I think this is very interesting. So I'll stop there and we'll go into more detail later on.
Mário, would you like to comment? Being the former head of Informatics department and now the Secretary of State for Digitalisation for Portugal.
Thanks very much. I almost feel obliged to start with my experience in the Commission and reinforcing the message that Veronica said, because for a number of countries, namely for the countries of the European Union, the collaboration is very intensive. And through programs like CEF Digital, in fact, we started a long time ago with building blocks that can be used and reused here and there. And I think that if I think about, well, e-delivery, that was one of the components that NIS has been putting in practice. There is also a big effort at the European level to have an e-delivery or an e-translation, or to have something more advanced like an European blockchain initiative. So those are very fundamental for all the members of the European Union to tap in and to learn, I would say, co-create and co-learn together. I mean, from the Portuguese point of view, I feel really linked to this effort that the Nordic countries are doing with the NIS, because not necessarily with the neighboring countries, but with the countries that speak the same language as us, we have done an intensive collaboration along the time. Not to the level of creating an entity that would say develop, maintain, but in the sense of offering the services that are developed in one country to the others, making sure that the people can co-work together. And this is proving very remarkable. Some of the examples with countries like Cape Verde was very interesting in the sense that they adopt some of our models, and because of their diaspora being so big, we have been able then to get the value added of this initial investment as a return for some of our services. So in a nutshell, I think that my experience in the Commission that obviously Veronica highlighted, and as a member state working in the European Union, and also with the links that we have with countries that have similar frameworks of law, similar values, have been proving that sharing and reuse is particularly important. And I think that will be important that we don't remain only at the level of sharing and reuse public services at governmental level, but that we pay particular attention to the local level. That's where a lot of things are happening. That's where initiatives like FiWare find their own ways, because as open foundations, they actually create services that can be replicated from one city to the other.
Thank you, Mário. And as you mentioned, the local level, I'm moving to the Czech Republic, and we have the Minister for Regional Development and Deputy Prime Minister for Digitalisation. So what would you bring out from your country? Are there some solutions that you have developed that you're ready to share?
Maybe first of all, thank you for inviting me here. It's my first time here in Estonia, first time in Tallinn, and I'm pretty sad it's only just one day I can stay here and go tomorrow back home. And I totally agree with the concept of resharing. Basically, that's what we are trying to bring to politics for 13 years. And in many aspects, even here, even as a presidential country right now, I can say I'm living my pirate dream. Because the things that were not possible historically, how we started about the geeks from the community reflecting the information society challenges, which is like 15 years or 40 years of the information society being on a race, it's happening. And there is one sad experience that it's sad, from COVID, and also right now with the current war in Ukraine. That the cooperation in particular matters brings us better benefits than either industrial or country-to-country competition. And basically this aspect that goes along with there is a customer or citizen in the center of all what we are trying to do is something that we were fighting for and trying to implement on the national level everywhere. The thing is, and maybe we've got different layers of executives here. Maybe the things that we talk about the regional and municipality solutions, it's just a smaller sample of nation and Europe, maybe Europe and world. So it means that what we've learned and maybe it's more applicable from the high-level point of view. If we go European on digital commons, if we go European on frameworks, because we already know what is experience sharing, how to do things according to Estonian example, UK example, Denmark example. But we shall take it also to the level of a technology and solution. And if we learn that not everything has to be publicly procured because we have a common solution for all European countries and they just implement. It's a module that could be replicated, and it's much harder to the level of a state, its institutions, and then as a solution to municipalities from something that would be not the Gov stack, but the Gov stack Czech Republic, because some of the modules, according to the national legislations, is quite specific from country to a country. So I do appreciate, and I talked to French representative just last week, that we will bring also more to the attention of the countries, all that common solution that could be used within different countries. So it's not just a legislative framework or founding, which we have a lot right now, but also to get more joy for the same amount of money, which means we can do more things if we share the final solutions and the final results. And it's gonna need also a lot of work at home, changing the legislation maybe in the future, or just to get in that there can be something developed once, but then shared by many, which is not of much that concept, but I believe even the business point of view, because I believe the old way of doing digitalization is that you procure the same solution from the companies and implement them, but there is so many things to do, significant amount of money, that even business would understand there are many opportunities, and having this deliver it us as a common good for people would fulfill the business model. So they won't be opposite of that. Historically, we saw that many steps done by the big business led to vendor lock-in, long-term licensing, but that's not the way to the progress. It was quite a long, sorry for that, but I'm just excited being here.
I'm glad you made it. You partly already started to talk about these buts, but we have the political support, we have the European support, we have the private sector / civil society support, we have the government support, but it's, and for several years already, in a way, digital public infrastructure and digital public goods, it's a new, let's say, a newly born trend and a trendy term, but actually has been with us already for quite some time. But still, we have not reached where we would like to reach, as pointed out by Lucas. Only a fraction of our budget and other resources goes to building solutions and sharing them with the others. So this actually brings me to a point we were discussing yesterday in a session on GovStack initiatives that Carlos, I saw him here from OECD, asked, so if this is all so great and we all agree on it, so where's the but? So I am now turning to these buts. So what is that is stopping us in moving further, and then hopefully we will also get to these tasks that Lucas gave us prior to discuss. But Veronica, you were pointing out first, so and we move further.
Maybe it's being the new kid on the block, but I'm quite optimistic. It seems to me that we are at a tipping point. I mean, if you just look over the last few years, look at the COVID pandemic, which made a lot of digital solutions thinkable that were unthinkable before. I think of that in my own country, Ireland. Suddenly in the health area, things became possible digitally that were never possible before. And so that's one aspect. And then then think of the response to the pandemic, the Recovery and Resilience Funds, which is a large amount of resources with a very strong digital dimension. So that's there too. Then we will be coming forward with a proposal before the end of the year to revamp our Interoperable Europe policy. And the idea there is to strengthen the legal basis for the collaboration of member states. And the interesting thing here, and all credit to Mário, because it was before I came into Digit, this was developed with the CIOs. So this was the CIOs in the member states saying that they wanted this regulation. In fact, we had a bit of difficulty sometimes with our central services in the Commission to say, well, why do you want a regulation if everything is non-binding? But we still want to leave it open for people to decide to participate and then share solutions, understand what works well, and learn from the good practice. And I think that this is something that the European Commission, it's at its raison d'etre, is to support collaboration between member states, to support collaboration with the other EU institutions. So I'm quite excited by that. That'll be coming through, we hope, before the end of the year, and we'll be discussing it with member states and Parliament next year. And I think this should provide a stronger forum for structured EU cooperation in this area. So I would be hopeful that we won't have many more buts.
Ivan, you...
I'm kind of young in the government, and it's my first presidency, and I don't know if in 13 years there will be another one. But that's the one thing that I do really support, because I was surprised how difficult it is to deal with the things on European level, how unsecure is the communication between my counterparts of EU ministries dealing with the crisis in Ukraine, how we have to secure the presidency, having a software of our own registration software, how we cannot share the documents on the European level between the institutions and prove this is a communication, this is the document. So all of them standards that could be done and will be used by the countries for the higher than a national agenda. National agenda is something different, but it could also get inspired and used because the processes are similar of dealing the documents, versioning, parallel voting on things, you know, finding consensus. So we don't use on this particular matter Slido, then we communicate through Signal, then you send it to some random email, minister something, which you don't know if he's reading it or other 30 people reading that. So this is one thing, that interoperability of European institution and having some common open standards for this higher than national level, it's very important for the future and for the security. And one thing you ask, what's that but? The change hurts, right? And there are many things that on a national level could be an issue. A lot of things are just hard-coded in the legislation. So to change that, you have to change the legislation, avoid anyone else to actually change the legislation the way you don't want it, get it to the first level of reading in the Parliament, then Senate, if you've got two chambers, it can get back. So it takes a year to get rid of, you need provide paper when you visit an office, to get that word out of it, because you cannot use some fast-track thing in the national Parliament. The second thing, and when I first was on a European event as a minister, I was listening to Ursula von der Leyen, and she said, we've got our targets, the long-term goals, Green Deal, right? Digital transformation, green transformation, post-COVID recovery, and then she named so many things. And when there is a war, of course, and we have to secure Europe on an energetic level and also on a cyber-sec. And don't give up, please. We have to do it at once. Don't give up them goals, and we're trying to, and actually we're pretty successful to do all the things. But then we've got the operation of individual state. You have to, you know, pay pensions. You know, you have to prove taxing calculation each year, and those systems are changing, of course, because the legislation changing. Then you've got that sad thing that's about politics. You've got elections almost each year. So basically, I can say from my experience that either you'd be able to hire 40 digital ninjas in your team, which the budget won't allow you, and you've got also a special procedure to hire those people. You couldn't say, oh, my friends from Estonia, please come here and work for Czech government tomorrow. You cannot do that. And so there is, of course, a capacity, even though you've got leaders and ministers who are in favor of that change, that everyday business is a significant break, and especially during the crisis. So there were a huge transformation project that I'm trying to achieve through the digital agency I'm creating. It's supposed to happen 3 years ago, but there was a COVID. So we went in the agile development of an application, quarantine, implementing readers for the COVID pass, for the green certificate, and all of that. And you can focus on many things, but not that many in the same time. And you can see it from a different level of the state, that sometimes the development goes pretty fast, because there is a specific time in the history, recent history, when you do just have time in agile to get focused on something and get the things done. But since you deal with the everyday operation, the things that could be done in 3 months is just taking 2 years. So this is one of them buts that in the crisis you need extra FTEs, extra muscle or brains to deliver, and it's hard to manage the change, OPEX, and maybe the legislation in the same time, because all of them things you have to be focused on, and then you also deal with the public acceptance to the crisis, which I believe each of the state of EU can tell its own story. Either it's inflation, or it's, which we've got almost same as Estonia, energy crisis, prices of everything, not sufficient goods through the supply chains. So there are many things that the politician has to make in the same time, and he can't just cut himself to the pieces or clone himself in that particular way. Which is not an excuse, we have to try.
I think Mário wanted to step in.
I think it was very interesting because Veronica used the notion of the tipping point, and then even brought this relation to the crisis. And it's true, and sometimes it's very unfortunate for us as politicians that we didn't do this without the impetus, the negative impetus of a crisis. But as any good crisis, let's take it as a good opportunity for all of us. And I think that what we saw at European level with the COVID certificate and others is, first, that we have been able to work with private sector to develop the solutions. They serve the public purpose, and this public purpose was harmonized, if I may say, along all the member states and much beyond. And the response was very immediate. Okay, it needed resources. We could find under the crisis resources. But I also share some of the reflections of Ivan on this respect. And I will add a few more. I mean, there is certainly a cultural dimension to the innovations that we have to put. Colleagues like Ben mentioned the cinema not invented by me or not invented here, certainly. But there is also questions of legacy. There is a huge legacy, and countries that have been in the forefront of the digitalization of the public administrations, and I proudly, because I wasn't really responsible for that, my predecessors were, Portugal has been very much fighting on the front line of digitalization, having citizen cards dematerialized, having wallets and everything. So there is a lot of legacy, and making sure that the financial department and the social security and education all align is already a challenge because of the different dynamics in the different ministries. So there is also this legacy that has to be understood. Then we can go even to more. I was listening to Ben and to the colleague speaking in the previous panel. I mean, there is so simple things like the notion of code versus the notion of service. In fact, what most of the countries would like is not just to receive a piece of reusable code. That's good. That's very good. But what people would like is to make sure that if that service, rather than the code, will be integratable, and the service implies a notion of operationalization of it, if something goes wrong, who is there on the other side of the line to help us to correct it? Probably in the context of this initiative NIS exists, but it's not easy to enlarge to several countries. And then very down to earth things like documentation. That's particularly important. You have to get the ownership of the integrating authority of a piece of software or a service. You have to understand what is there, the reasoning. So documentation, that is something that software guys are sometimes not particularly attentive. Even from a point of view of linguistic, will be challenges. But this to say that, even I think that remains for us this responsibility to consider those as challenges, but not as problems, and overcome them, because, as you say, if we are able to build a market of public services that we can use and reuse, we can go faster, we avoid aspects of complicated interoperability because we base the same foundation, the same standardization, or the same concepts. And this is particularly important for the future of Europe.
Yes, thank you.
May I just react?
Yes.
I agree with the thing that the crisis is acceleration, but there are many of us who did not need accelerate at all.
Exactly.
We'd like to jump in, focus on what we think is our mission, even though, you know, if you do politics, you need also to, you know, care about other things than just digitalization, even though it's fundamental for almost any aspect of human life. But I would appreciate to work under less pressure of the crisis that we cannot somehow affect.
But Ivan, that's probably, I think, the challenge for us is to transform a moment of shaking all of us into something that is actually more structural. This means that we consider digitalization as a normal and ambitious process independent of a crisis. And I think that relies with us as politicians to make sure that we are able to do this structural change.
And I interrupted Ben.
I'm sorry. I mean, we interrupt each other.
So Ben, you have been following this conversation, and the momentum is there. Everything is there. But if you had to give those guys advice, the three things, what do you think?
Well, I think,
they should do.
To go back to this, there's a lot there. But I would say that, you know, in the process of what is the, you know, we can do this, but there is, you know, a series of responses to all these things which are about the de-risking of this type of adoption, you know, and that is, you know, really something that is a long-term process of changing, you know, default sort of critical frameworks within the ministries and also within the Directorates-General, in the sense that, you know, things like documentation or things like, you know, de-risking on all fronts, security models, I think is another huge issue that we really need to talk about, is that, you know, open source is something that people have a very hard time understanding how it can be secure, because just conceptually, you know, it's like, oh, this is open, so it's defenseless, you know, and instead what it means is that you have many more eyes on hardening it, you know, and working together collaboratively to make that successful. But you have to include the idea of the security model in the shared resource. You know, it's not just the code base. It's like, what are the practices around that code base? And to your point, Mário, it's that the idea that, you know, the code base and the service are sort of two sides of the same thing, and it's kind of a question of who is the operationalizer, right? And so one of the things I think is really important in this era is that the ministries take on the agency of recognizing that it is their responsibility ultimately to be the operationalizer. Even if they have outside vendors that are doing that work for them, the technical literacy about what those architectures are is something that needs to be retained internally, because then you surrender the driver's seat to the vendor. If you say you are going to be the technical architect and you're going to start telling me what the next thing is that I need. And so this is part of what the community of practice, in a way, is not just a way to socialize the ability to share this code, but it's also, you know, a support group almost for people that have to do the organizational change within their own ministries about understanding what their role needs to be relative to the application, that they are part of a collaboration that has the agency to decide the technical roadmap in the future of the application. And so that you know, sort of ownership conceptually of the operationalization is a really huge threshold to get over. But it is hopefully with the de-risking of some of the you know, the sort of framework of community and, you know, the standard and these things that we provide, that we're hoping that this de-risks that and makes it something that people can, you know, that stakeholders can actually, you know, take the risk, you know, because it's lowered. And once you get over a certain tipping point threshold, like you said, you know, you have enough adoption among member states in the European Union, but elsewhere globally, like that you now can see, like, oh, we now visibly see the positive effects of the results of this adoption in a you know, sister state, and that will create a new rationale within our own decision-making process that then we can pull, you know, we can refer to that and say, well, look how the success over here was. And hopefully, you know, our process again is going to be about elucidating those case studies to say, you know, here are examples of where these successes have happened. And I think this also sounds like what Digit is planning on doing on a European scale as well. And so this, you know, these types of mechanisms will then begin to sort of the jet wash, you know, sort of the acceleration of all of these people, you know, moving towards these choices will then create a feedback loop that makes more services available and instinctively makes people look toward those services as possible solutions.
as long as we don't proliferate too many networks, catalogs, whatever, because, you know, how can we do this in a way that people know where to go? Because that is, I think, a challenge that I certainly have found in the last 6 months. That I'm hopeful that working closely with the CIOs, we can really put in place something that is recognised for where we can gather that kind of knowledge together and spread it and share it around.
Thank you. Ben, you stepped in one area I wanted also to touch. You were talking a bit on how to create this demand, let's say, by starting to adopt and have these mechanisms created and have this habit. But we have mainly been discussing how to sort of convince governments, CIOs, and these organizations that are involved in digitalization. But what about creating a demand for open source and let's say publicly shared code and solutions among private sector? But let's not also forget citizens in this picture. So how would you comment this from your experience? It's probably a tough one to. Would you like to kick off and
well,
maybe
I'll
take
just
it to the
quickly respond. I mean, I think that there are opportunities actually on the regional and local scale. I think is where these types of code bases are the most potentially prolific, because they are solving problems, real local problems for citizens that are actually tractable in terms of just the actual rollout operationally of a service on that scale is much more easily done. And you have, because you will achieve coverage, even on a national scale before you go to international replication, which is actually often quite a lot easier to sort of finance and create regulatory frameworks around, because you're in one, sort of legal framework. You reach this kind of scale that you need to in order to have that be a default choice quite quickly. Like if you have 30 municipalities that have replicated a system for library management or whatever it is, then like this happens in Denmark all the time. They actually have a really, even before we arrived, they had developed this amazing informal way of sharing municipal digital resources with each other. And now they have, because they were early to recognize that their governments have many of the same needs, the municipal governments have many of the same needs, and so they actually built a tool that allowed them to look at when their service contracts with private providers was coming up, so that they could bundle their ask, so that like 5 municipalities together could say, like, either they could negotiate better, or they could say, hey, we're all spending 3 million euros a year to get this service contract, but if we all spent that on an open source development project with vendors, then we would have a tool that we had agency over and we can move forward at our own discretion. And so it's kind of unlocking these capabilities, in doing the kind of almost network analysis of what municipalities can do together, which is something that is the responsibility of the state, because again, municipalities, like I said in the last panel, they are not set up to talk to their peers. That is not in their remit. They don't reach out to each other very often. So they have networks of collaboration that sort of overlap on top of each other. But they don't often say, oh, we've built a tool that now we should go out and sell to another municipality, because that's not what they do. But they need to do that if it's an open tool, because that propagation and that replication is the thing that keeps it alive, makes it viable as a thing to invest in by everybody, and creates the fastest change and bug fixes and moving it forward along the technical roadmap.
So, Ivan, your background as a head of the Pirate Party for several years and working extensively on participation and direct democracy. So, what would be your take? How to create this demand among the community that is a big part of the development of an open source? And
I hope
do you have some good hints?
I hope I wouldn't end up as a completely cynical guy on the very end of my political career. I think everything starts with the trust. The states who've got a big trust of its people to the governments are much faster in delivering the digital services. If I take a look on who is not that successful, and we are in the middle somewhere, Czech Republic, is that it's what is mood within the society. In Czech, if I would say, people first don't want to be bothered by municipalities and by government. You can sell it the Denmark model to them, right? In the very end, you've got your taxing proposal, and if you do nothing, it's calculated and you pay. Would the Czech person trust the government it's going to calculate it correctly? Probably, yeah. So first it's not to be bothered, right? Then you request services that you need, some life situations that are relevant often, which are usually the financial ones though, otherwise you don't need to do things with the government that often. And then there is a third thing that you say, and I want to have it open source, secure. It's very hard, and a lot of digital cool solutions doesn't have sufficient marketing that people would actually say, wow, that's cool, I want it. We are dealing with the e-wallet, right, and e-identity. One of the biggest questions we're going to ask probably and discuss today later on is how we get people to use them, because we've got already our national identity systems. We try to learn them and teach them why the e-ID from banks is cool, and now we're going to give them something else, what's going to be the benefit. So it has to be promoted, but it's very hard if there is like more than one level consequence of to actually explain people they should demand it. If we would share the solution between the cities, we've got 6,000 municipalities in Czech Republic, that's no fun. Denmark's got 100. Less. So if you share the resources, then you've got more money, so the kindergarten could be fixed. You've got no way how you explain to people this consequence. I'm always in favor of, let's say, the positive motivation. For example, in city cooperation, that was ITI, but we've got one more ITI, then it's over. And unbelievably, cities can cooperate by themselves because there was the money behind, and they do projects when they do have a sufficient funding. If the states would switch to the national level of a founding of ITI principles, we can make cities to cooperate much easier. If there is no money behind that, it's kind of, you know, it's kind of hard. We do have a modules of successful reuse, but it wasn't on the open source. It was basically because you always do public procurement of a sufficient solution for little money. So once, for example, a traffic card was deployed in a big city, they go for the public procurement in the next city with the recommendation of working example and with lowering the price because the initial development was already in place, so they put few extra things, a new logo, and they rename it, but they basically deploy the same product, but it's still proprietary software. Yeah. So I think it's a lot about evangelization, and also, and that's a tool of EU, which somebody is criticizing by setting a framework and financial subsidies to specific things. You support the way of policy you want to implement. No one makes you to take the money from EU. It's not mandatory, right? If you provide sources, resources, you can say under these conditions. And I believe, and that's why I started, I'll be completely cynical, because I always thought politics are more about ideas and visions, not that how much money you've got on your pile and from what pile you're going to take it. But this is how we should do that. And I'm happy we've got the European layer here, and we are representing state right now for next 3 months. So this could be also how we do implement the horizontal principles, farm to fork, right? Green Deal, digital, do no significant harm. So there could be easily a layer under the digital transformation horizontal rule that says, and a public domain, and common open source has to include the open data, and it's already in there. It's already in there, but it doesn't have that effect or aspect of the horizontal rule that somehow gives you an extra. I wouldn't go to, like, let's say, direct mandatory principle. It's too early. It's too early for that, and we don't have that many. The community could not carry that, even though even big corp is delivering open source solution. But the principles of open data, smart cities is already in there. But we need to work on that probably more time. Okay. So.
Would you like to step in and then we...
I think that although the question was focused on, say, open software, and I think that we have to distinguish or to put side by side good software and open software. Not all the open software is good, like not all the proprietary software is good, and what we are looking is for good software. But I'd like to take even a principle, because I think it's very important. The challenge that we have, both at local or national level, is to concentrate on our citizens. And for them, what they want is frictionless services. You said, I mean, the trust. The trust is part of the user experience, is part of the ability to be only requested to provide information when really the public administration doesn't have it, and that we don't fall into the trap of continuously asking the same information, is to make sure that the authentication of the citizens is a very strong authentication, because this is giving the trust and the perception of the trust that is necessary. And then you said, and I always advocate this, I don't think that if we really succeed on the digitalization of our countries, I don't believe that any public administration is going to be able to develop all the services that the citizens need. Because we develop the services that the average of the citizen needs, but there is particular parts of the citizens, or in their role of social bodies, or non-governmental, or entrepreneurial, or large corporations, that they need a different perspective. And that's why the APIs in the open data is so important, that we maintain it. Is not just the principle, it's again, how do you operationalize this? Because it's very easy, the concept of maintaining an API, but sometimes it's difficult to resist the tendency, oh, now we change it quickly, without understanding that a lot of others are pending on this one, especially if we establish a relation between central and local government that use common services. So it's very important that we have these dimensions. And open source for us is since 2011 as a must from law, and we work on that one. We want to have APIs. We actually, in practice, are very happy to reuse. I mean, our open portal for data is actually based on the ETALab in the French UData solution. So that's great, but we have to go from those examples to a more systematic process of ensuring that we all adhere to these principles.
Maybe. And it's more of what I worked for 20 years in my professional career, which is not the political career. It somehow happened to me. The one thing that's almost even in the higher level, because in the very end, and you said there are specific groups that need special services. It could be disabled people. It could be people who, I don't know, they don't have access to the internet, but they somehow are managed through local authorities. And I used to work as an enterprise architect all my life. And we do have a significant gap also on that above architecture. And often when we go from the bottom, from community, you start with the case that is actually covered by the bigger case. I had the discussion yesterday with a really reporter I do like from the magazine Reporter in Czech, and he say, about that ID, I'm taking care of my mother, right, who is old, 80 years old, and I need to take care of her, and I have to register within the system, but with her ID, bank ID, which he created for her. And those are the roles that people are playing in life. So once you have an architecture, how the roles are managed, that's me, Ivan, politician, that's me, Ivan, citizen, that's me, Ivan, living on the Prague too. Yeah. I'm just entering different roles. So if we do have that higher level solution on the architecture, and I learn architecture because I don't like programming, and you have to learn always something new. But architecture is high level ontology. You say, this is the description of the world, how we understand it, and you derive processes, and then the implement architecture is platform independent. And it could be done in the very crisis. We still can back on the paper if something goes wrong. Hopefully we won't have to, right? But you just covering the process by different solution. And in that time, when you say, we do have a solution for that, and this is a open source or common approved safe solution, and you can use it, but if you want to go on your own, or you've got big non-modular a resort system for the healthcare, obviously you couldn't just take our small piece of a e-recipe, which we have in place, but I'm just taking this example, and implement it. Then you just implement that particular framework solution to your legacy vendor lock-in expensive system. And your choices in the future when the contract's over, have that built on the green field based on the modular approach of the common core.
And this is why I was saying that technical architecture is something that needs to be internalized within public administrations, because it is in a way almost now part of the policy generation process. It is now, if you're going to, have policy that has organizational results, if you're litigating to change the way that the state is operating, rather than just applying that into the extant policy, you're also going to be generating possibly a code base to serve the need that you've now identified. And that parity is something that is not one that's externalized and one that's the thing that you recognize as what the function of the government is. Both of those things are a function of the government, and therefore you need to, because in order to then go out and do this kind of modular, taking on of service operationalization, within an ecosystem of all these partners, I mean, we really come back again to this idea of trusted connectivity, because this is where you have the ability to articulate a need in a policy context, that then is translated in a technology context, and then there is this network of possible reusable components that exist within other states that have also had this same technical need that is generated by policy. And especially in a situation like the European Commission or the European Union, where you have policy directives that are already going to normalize, there's a normative force in the types of technical needs you're going to have. The idea that the European Commission also is providing a library of these resources that will solve technically the problem that you're being asked to implement in a policy context is, sort of part of the service that Europe can provide to its member states.
I would like to pick up on this, actually, that Mário started to mention on sort of the sustainable mechanism that is needed to be introduced in order to take over and reuse all the solutions that are either being provided by the European Union or by some other member states. And in our previous panel, we saw also some good examples of Nice, how countries have come together and how they do work together to develop and use and reshare what they develop. There are several international initiatives that have also been mentioned, GovStack yesterday, that is by some governments such as Germany, Estonia, ITU, and DIAL, that also takes this approach to pooling resources and developing open source solutions and bringing it together from all over the world. So what do you say, what is needed to scale these initiatives, or perhaps build on these initiatives, both in Europe, but perhaps Mário also in Portugal?
Well, yeah, you almost scared me by naming so many initiatives, because having too many initiatives is probably part of the problem and not part of the solution. But I think that, funny enough, in a lot of those initiatives, they're the same actors, okay? So I think that we have to also rationalize this to make sure that we become effective. The example of Nice is certainly a very successful example. Can it be modeled elsewhere? I mean, do we have, and we come back to the political will, let's assume that for a second that we have the political will, but do we have the governance mechanisms? Are we able to empower a particular organization to help us on that one? We come to the documentation, but also the certification, so important from a security point of view. So how do we communicate what are the services or the products that can be available? Do we have a market? Do we have a broker? So there is a number of challenges in all of them. So probably the challenge is like we are doing here today. And this Tallinn, a lot of colleagues that intervened in different occasions said, yeah, I thought that I was coming to a digital event, and in fact I realized that actually it has so many implications in all other, in economic, in construction, in infrastructure, in trust in general, so the connectivity. So maybe what we need is to start understanding that rather than having, just looking to the so many groups or organizations, what are the real important topics? And this one may look like as an important one. Let's share and reuse. Let's make available what you produced and give it away to others. I mean, there is an effort in all that, because giving it away, as you said, Ben, is not just giving it away, it's giving it away in a way that others can internalize, that can understand, that can, in a lot of cases, co-create. And we have so many challenges. Even you mentioned that the identity, the digital identity, is still a conceptual and practical challenge for all of us. But AI, I mean, you know, AI, as in your terminology, if I say a public code, as actually tests to the limit almost everything. We need to know if it is transparent, or who is accountable for that one. I mean, you know, deals with a lot of citizens. So what is the implications? How do we disclose that? I mean, and the algorithms, if there is something difficult to explain, is an algorithm. So maybe we can take this as you know, having impact. I mean, in another group that you didn't mention, but it was the inheritor of D5, D9 for the ones that are used to the digital public services. Now it's called Digital Nations. You know, 10 of the you know, nations that are relatively advanced and keep exchanging good practices. Yeah, Portugal will be leading this group for the next period. So yes, I think that will be important also to bring this dimension globally. You know, so. My appeal is, you know, if we really believe that this question about having, you know, or having assets, goods that we can all freely use because we co-create them, if this is important as it has been, you know, shared as being, let's permeate this into the different bodies that we are working in, making sure that each one has a particular contribution to this objective.
Did you want to step in?
I would react because we can add few more, right? There is this open source program office that is collaborative work. We already mentioned the Gaff stack, and I wouldn't cut the conclusion right now, but in French is gonna love me for that. But there was the initiative that started, and they there was a working group on the European level of many states, and they do have a conclusion and proposals. And then my colleagues from the community wouldn't like me to say that, but if we wanna take it seriously on the European level, we shall think to have it institutionalized somehow, right? I give you a use case I'm dealing with right now. I've got a lot of colleagues from different parliaments who were successful with upskilling, which is one of the parts that we are still missing. The know-how within the ministries that they could actually get the code, read the notes, and apply it, for example, or operate it after that. So we are dealing with upskill, right? And I've got many big tech companies who are committed, and they did successful upskill because they do it for their own employees. It could be IBM, Google, Microsoft. And I wanna, you know, get my Red Hat folks in there and the open software community. And now I was talking to my friends here in Estonia, and it's like, who should I ask to have that part filled, you know? But I'm using my network to get something that could be for each state. You want to have a significant upskill also in the open source, so it wouldn't be only the products of those companies. Who shall I ask, you know, on a European level? And so I'm not saying have an office, have a USPA on the open source, maybe sometimes, right? But do those first steps, you know, have a small body of people who are carrying that, because now it's decentralized. You know, you want to deal with you know, module implementations, go to GovStacks. You wanna share what the open data can be derived applications from. Call these guys, and and there are like 5 or 6 recommendations of that initiative. I'd like to bring it in there. It's not like having hard pressure. We need to have that because we've got resources. We already understand it's important for that particular matter, and that's why I said, and we should somehow take it and move it a little bit farther. Because what I'm saying, and I did that before, there are for sure people who are top-level excellent specialists with already existing networks. So those should be in charge. Because for politician and the citizen, I am looking to that as a useful service to be implemented on eGov. So it's not on politician to ask, wow, I have to study how the open source works so I can talk about it. I'm saying, I've got trusted body here who give me the recommendation, who would provide good examples, and you know, this is the reliable body. So outsource that. Inside of the organization, we are deciding the policies for Europe about.
So you were very exact. We ended exactly at 0 seconds left. So thank you for that. We had 3 very powerful people to push for digital public infrastructure. Quite recently started in their positions. I believe we can be quite hopeful for the year to come to see how much of what we discussed today has been materialized, and Ben will keep a track on on what has been done. So
give Veronica this,
thank you,
the standard for
thank you
public.
very much, and give our panelists a great applause. Thank you.